Hello and welcome to another episode of COPD Wellness. In our last podcast, we started chatting to Dr. Stephen Phinney, a physician scientist who has spent 35 years studying diet, exercise, fatty acids, and inflammation. Currently, Dr. Phinney is the Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of Virta Health, a specialty medical clinic that reverses type 2 diabetes safely and sustainably without the risks, costs, or side effects of medication or surgery. In the last episode, Russell and Stephen talked about the application of ketogenic diets to respiratory disease. In this episode, Russell continues his chat with Stephen, so sit back and enjoy part 2 of our interview with Dr. Stephen Phinney.
Just changing gears a little bit, I just want to get your opinion on the relationship between blood glucose, insulin, and inflammation when we're talking about, say, a standard Western diet, and what sort of effects blood glucose, insulin, and inflammation has on a person.
Excellent question. Very complex topic, because inflammation it sounds bad, but inflammation is absolutely necessary for healing and growth and health. And whether it's you get a cut and you want it to heal, the inflammation's involved. If you run a marathon and you're sore for the next 3 days afterwards, that's inflammation healing the muscle damage that was caused by the physical activity. All those are positive things. But when inflammation sticks around longer than necessary, that is, it's not when you have an acute need, but on average, when you body isn't under stress, the higher your inflammation level, the greater your risk for heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and cancer. So high chronic levels of inflammation in the body carry with them chronic risk. And those tend to be associated with high levels of insulin, and eating carbohydrates and having high blood sugar drives up insulin. And so that's a common association. Getting into the biochemistry, it gets to be more complex. And how the body regulates this very essential but also very dangerous balance between enough but too much, not too much. Basically humans and our ancestors and animals before us have had 1 billion years of evolution to make this very complex. And it turns out that a lot of it works at the genetic level, that there are genes that regulate inflammation. And the more those genes are turned on, the more inflamed you are. The less turned on they are, the less inflamed you are. And one of the ones that I know you know the acronym for is called the NLRP3 inflammasome. It's kind of the sergeant major of one of the inflammation pathways, that it controls a lot of other downstream inflammation effects. And when one gets into nutritional ketosis, this ketone that we make in our body naturally that circulates in the bloodstream when we keep our carbs quite low and our protein moderate, it's called beta-hydroxybutyrate. And that ketone turns out to be a particularly potent regulator of this NLRP3 inflammasome, that the higher your ketones are, the more you turn down the inflammation thermostat through that single genetic regulator. So this is called an epigenetic effect of ketones. The other factor is that when we burn glucose, our cells make things called free radicals, or the more technical term are reactive oxygen species. And reactive oxygen species are pro-inflammatory. When we burn ketones, our cells make less reactive oxygen species, which do less inflammatory damage. So think of ketones as a cleaner burning fuel than glucose. And ketones are made in the liver from fat. So if you want to lose weight, by the way, you can take some of the stuff you have in storage. Your liver makes it into this clean burning fuel, which also downregulates inflammation. And what's not nice about that picture? What's not positive about that? And so that's a process that we can harness to deal with a number of inflammatory mediated conditions. And again, in our population in Indiana, we have a routine questionnaire. We ask them about aches and pains. And again, for overweight people, lower extremities tend to be a problem in terms of arthritis or muscle or joint problems. And even before people lose a lot of weight, they say, I wake up in the morning and I'm less stiff. I have less need to take anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen or acetaminophen, just to get through the day. which indicates that we're having a kind of a potent effect at a very basic level in terms of the body's ability to manage healing and well-being without overreacting.
Yes, the just butting in there also, the NLRP3 inflammasome, I saw a report not long ago, a study where it is a major contributor to respiratory disease, in particular COPD. So I guess this gives a bit of weight to another reason why respiratory patients could well benefit from adopting this style of diet.
Yep, the biochemistry is there, and people who've explored this, like yourself, and I'm impressed by the level of research you've done. I don't know your background, Russell, but you could have been a medical scientist and an excellent one at that, based on what I've seen so far.
Well, that's very kind of you, but I have no medical training. I just like reading scientific papers where they apply to my disease. I guess any way I can improve my quality of life and pass that message on to other patients, I think has got to be a good thing to do. On to diets as such. One thing I've come across of recent times, and this again is to me a little bit confusing, is when you look at dietary recommendations and these are from lung associations around the world, they're pretty similar. And I'm amazed at the content of carbohydrates that they have in these diets. They're recommending a lot of rice, a lot of pasta, breads, those sort of foods. Now, my own experience, when I eat those sort of foods, I become very breathless, and the impact is quite common. Now, I would think that surely medical doctors would see this in patients, but is part of the problem that there's just not enough nutritional awareness, I guess, with the medical profession?
I don't want to throw stones at my own profession. I'm an
I agree.
Doctor, what was considered a good medical school. I've done all the training stuff. I no longer practice medicine personally because I'm trying to, change the way we can deliver this. But realize that you can't ask physicians to practice something they were never taught. And in the United States, I think fewer than 1/3 of medical schools have any actual practical nutrition coursework in their curriculum. So if physicians learn anything about nutrition, it's usually secondhand. They'll talk to a dietitian, or maybe they know somebody who's doing research in this area, but it's happenstance. And then the other part of it is, at least in the U.S., we have this general concept we call the standard of care. What is it okay for physicians to do in their practice? And that's the standard of care. And that is a necessary entity in terms of physicians self-policing themselves against quackery. People saying, I've got this device that you put it on and it'll just melt away body fat. And, that would be outside the standard of care, and medicine polices itself. Well, the standard of care has kind of worked against us in bringing nutrition into the respected area of medical practice, because there has been so much quackery in the area of nutrition. And, we have TV personalities in the United States. I mean, one of them was advocating something called raspberry ketones, as whatever that is, had nothing to do with nutritional ketosis, but it put me and my research under a cloud because people say, raspberry ketones, Steve Phinney ketones, quackery. It's very hard to break through that in the way healthcare is basically self-regulated, and the fact that we don't train physicians in this means that they don't have any comfort level with the understanding. So Jeff Volek and I are actually planning, this is not an advertisement, it's just a statement, we're planning what we think is the first fully scientific nutritional ketosis conference for healthcare professionals that we're going to hold next August in the state of Ohio. Jeff is a professor at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, and we'll be running a continuing medical education course that There are other courses where physicians can participate and come, and I give lectures at them, but many of them are by non-expert speakers. There's nothing bad about that. You could go and give a remarkable talk about your experience as a COPD patient, and it would be a great talk. But we want this to be, scientifically based, academically credible research, and this will be the first time in 2 days that we will put this together. And we're excited about having the opportunity to finally do this. That we can actually hold a course at a medical school that's designed for physicians, and that's really our first foothold into this. And by the way, we will be videotaping that, and we will post it on YouTube. So it's not going to be, a private small thing. We want to push this out as far as we can.
Look, I think that's a wonderful idea, and I think there would be quite a few medical professionals to line up to come along and participate in your course. The one thing I struggle with, I write a lot of articles about my experience with the ketogenic diet and my disease in general, but in relation to the ketogenic diet, I do get a lot of pushback, and a lot of medical professionals look at me as if I'm a patient who is a little bit radical and trying dangerous things. But from what I read in the literature, the ketogenic diet's been around since the 1920s, and I figure if it's dangerous, then we would know that by now. So I think making the medical professionals aware of this being a realistic strategy, not only for COPD and other respiratory diseases, but a multitude of diseases, would be a wonderful thing. And I think the reduction of the burden on healthcare in not just your country but in ours would be huge.
Yeah, I think it has multiple benefits. One of them is well-being of the patient, and that's got to be the first thing. But reducing the cost of healthcare and improving not just lifespan, but we call it health span. The quality of life as well as the duration of life are things that, why not shoot for a big target? And by the way, one thing I wanted to mention, I think, Russell, when we spoke in Brisbane when I was there a year ago, I mentioned what I thought was a watershed article that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 1976. And it was a study done by a researcher who was willing to kind of think a little outside the box. And he had noticed that when patients with a particular kind of chronic lung disease called obesity hypoventilation syndrome, is also called Pickwickian syndrome. It's a disease where the brain loses its sensitivity to carbon dioxide. So the two things and this is too simple, but the two things that make us breathe, one is oxygen being too low, and the other is carbon dioxide building up too much. So the body has two different drives for breathing, but with this Pickwickian syndrome, the brain loses the sensitivity to CO2, so CO2 can get quite high, and the body doesn't care, but that puts people to sleep because CO2 acts like a narcotic when it builds up too high in the blood. So this guy had noticed that when people fasted for a couple days, they seemed to have a lot better function. Then when they went back to eating, their respiratory function got a lot worse. So we actually tested them on a ketogenic diet before and then after a ketogenic diet. And this was without significant weight loss, so it wasn't a weight loss factor, and showed that ketones appear to directly restore. The higher the ketone levels in the blood, the more it restores that brain sensor to CO2. And that people would have dramatically improved respiratory function as a direct result of ketones in the blood. Now, this is published in what is considered one of the best and most prominent medical journals in the world. And it's just sat there. And again, I've met respiratory function experts, physicians who are experts in pulmonary medicine who never heard of this. And again, if someone, nobody's going to go back and read papers from 50 years ago unless, there's someone tells them about them. And so again, we've got to get this message out that it's not just a fad diet where people lose weight. It's not just something that temporarily might improve a person's function and well-being. This is something where we now know at the molecular level that it has specific and very potent effects to the benefit of people with a range of chronic diseases, including pulmonary disease, And again, CO2 mediated respiratory drive, which is what this is wrong in people with Pickwickian syndrome. It's a problem to some degree in people like yourself. And having less CO2 to get rid of, that is because the fat is burned, makes much less CO2 when you burn it than carbohydrate, and then having a better drive. I mean, there are a bunch of things working together. It's almost a choreographed process that benefits human physiology when one goes into nutritional ketosis.
Yeah, and I guess people who do have a lot of problems exchanging gases and getting rid of their CO2, a diet where you are actually producing less CO2 has got to be easier or less burdensome to your lungs. And I wonder how much that would actually affect those patients who have continual problems with oxygen saturation.
Now, again, the responses are individual. Some people, the responses are dramatic, some people less so. But on average, the effect appears to be very potent.
Going on to what we talked about a little bit before is how you get your ketones, and there's a lot of talk, and I think some of it's quite ridiculous about ketone supplements and what they can and can't do for you. I'll cite an experience I've had. So earlier this year when I was in London, I was fortunate enough to try the ketone ester developed by Dr. Veach. I visited Professor Kieran Clark's lab at Oxford University. When I arrived there, I had actually been out of ketosis for quite a few days because I was having problems sourcing the right sort of food. My symptoms had returned quite dramatically, and Professor Clark let me sample some of the ketone ester just to see what sort of effect it would have. And what amazed me was within an hour, my symptoms had dissipated. I'd become far less breathless, and I couldn't believe how much of a difference it made. I know the esters are different to products being sold on the market today, but what's your opinion of supplementary ketones?
That's certainly an area of very active research, and it has tremendous promise in terms of activating these, what we call epigenetic effects. So it's not just a fuel, but it's also almost a hormone-like signal that, again, anything in excess has the potential to do harm. So finding out the right form for the ketones, sometimes they're given as salts, sometimes they're given as esters. When you give them as salts, it has to contain either sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, along with the ketones. And so a little bit of those are good. Sometimes too much is bad. So figuring out how to do that is, we're in the infancy of that. I think I'm a little concerned because the products have gotten into the market long before the research has gotten done. And so, we put the cart in front of the horse here. But the research is extremely interesting and I think very promising. But I want to put this in perspective. I don't have a meter on my liver that says, what it minute by minute, how many ketones it's making. But I suspect that my liver makes somewhere between 50 and 100 grams of ketones per day. And then my body burns those. So the levels in the blood stay at a very modest amount. And it's a normal homeostatic state. But let's say it's between 50 and 100. Let's say it's 75 grams. I did see an advertisement to buy the ketone esters that Doctors Veach and Clark, Richard Veach and Kieran Clark have developed. And, they've spent a decade doing very careful research in animals and so on. And I don't fault them for putting this in the market. But the cost in the U.S. for 75 grams of ketones in the ester form is $99.
Yeah.
So I think of my liver as generating $100 worth of value to me every day. Now, if I'm on a bicycle and I'm trying to beat somebody over a alpine pass, and I down 25 grams of these ketones, and that gives me a 2-minute advantage over that other person, that would make the difference between being number one on the podium at the Tour de France and number two, and the value there is in the millions of dollars. So there are places in space, underwater, in high oxygen environments, in deep sea divers, where you want to decrease oxidative stress. There are places where these things can really transform how humans function. And so I'm all for that research. Again, if I can buy regular stuff in the grocery store and I make really delicious meals. I made some roasted pork belly last night. I finally got the recipe right. This is bacon before it's cured, and you just roast it.
Beautiful.
It's just a very delicious food, and it's the right combination of protein and fat. It's not high protein. And by the way, I will tell you that lard, pork fat, is half monounsaturated fat. People think, oh, it's all animal saturated. No, it's half monounsaturated. It's a good mix for fuel for humans. If I can do that, and I buy the pork belly at my local big box store for $3 a pound, that's a really cheap way to get ketones. So we got to find the right balance between getting the diet right and using the supplements. In your case, you're on an airplane, I presume, for 2 days at a time, and airplane food is not conducive to a well-formulated ketogenic diet. And you were getting behind the 8 ball physiologically, bringing the ketones in. Excellent idea. We just need to become wise in how we use them and be careful that we don't oversell or overconsume and cause imbalances or problems that would then taint the whole field. I want to come out of this, with expertise and understanding that lets us move this whole field forward.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I've tried probably a half a dozen different types of ketone supplements. But I think it's all about getting the diet right. And if you're doing the diet properly, you will measure a healthy amount of blood ketones and you'll get benefit from that. I guess for our audience listening, it'd be nice to hear what a daily ketogenic protocol is for you as far as what do you eat on a daily basis.
Well, I tend to eat 3 meals a day, but sometimes in the morning I get up and I'm not particularly hungry. I eat when I'm hungry, and I don't force myself to eat specific foods or quantities of food. I haven't weighed anything in years. Well, I have, but it's only new foods where I look at the labels and I weigh it and I try to figure out how do I fit this proportionally into what I eat. But typically breakfast might be some leftover meat and some cheese from the night before, or it might be a couple eggs with some sauteed onions. I like coffee. I like cream in my coffee. So I use heavy cream. I don't use half and half. I definitely don't use chemical creamers. I typically don't snack much during the day. My lunch will typically be a salad with meat or tuna fish or something like that. And then dinner is usually 2 vegetables and a source of protein, fish, meat. We benefit here in California from ready access to excellent Australian lamb. We don't grow enough lamb in California to satisfy our needs, and so we're benefited by the ocean routes that bring us good lamb, and I don't cut the fat off it. It comes fatty, and I consume the fat. And I eat desserts fairly commonly, and desserts I make would be something like homemade ice cream or cheesecake. And for sweeteners, I'm not a big fan of the artificial sweeteners. There are some nutritive common sweeteners. My favorite one is a 5-carbon sugar called xylitol, which occurs in the sap of some trees and in the cobs of corn, so it's not corn syrup sweetener. And xylitol doesn't raise insulin, and it actually may have some anti-inflammatory properties when consumed in moderation. If you eat too much of it, it can cause gastrointestinal problems. But put a little bit of xylitol in with some sweet, heavy cream, make homemade ice cream, delicious. Use it in a cheesecake, and I'll sometimes put berries in the cheesecake. And again, I'll make a cheesecake a dish that's about this big in diameter, 12 servings, and each serving is about 200 calories. So I make that once in 2 weeks, and I can have a serving a day as long as I keep my family away from the rest of it. Because it's really good and people enjoy it. Alcohol is allowed, and I like wine with dinner, and we do make pretty good wines here in California. And again, grape juice in the raw is 25% by weight sugar. Grape juice, after it's been fermented by that wonderful invention called yeast, gets the sugar content down to about 1%. So 100 cc's, 100 mils of red wine has 1 gram of sugar. And so 1 to 2 glasses of wine can be a healthy component to a well-formulated ketogenic diet. Not necessary. I don't advocate it, but it's not something that one has to avoid.
Yeah, I found early on when I first started on the ketogenic diet, I would be very easily taken out of ketosis by especially wine. But what I've found is the longer I've been on the diet and in ketosis, the more I can tolerate different foods. And most nights I will have at least a glass, maybe 2 glasses of red wine with dinner, and I can wake up in the morning and still measure quite reasonably high blood ketones. When we're talking about nutritional ketosis, as you and Jeff Follick call it, what is the range of blood ketones patients should be looking for?
Physiologically, we think that the benefits start at about 0.5 millimolar for fuel. That is providing fuel to the body, particularly the brain. As you know, your brain can't burn fat directly, so it's either got to burn glucose or it's got to burn ketones. And, again, the brain's a very expensive date, energy-wise. It's about 600 calories a day that's consumed by the intact human brain. So, 0.5 is where ketones begin to take over for glucose in the brain. And it doesn't appear that a lot more is better. So the range we look at is 0.5 to 3 millimolar. Some people will go up on 4 or 5 millimolar on a ketogenic diet. If somebody does a complete fast for a week, no calories for a week, I don't advocate that because there are some people who do deny this, but the research is ironclad that in a week of total fasting, half your weight loss comes from lean tissue. You don't want to lose that lean tissue. But if somebody fasts for a week, they'll get up in the 5 to 7 range of ketones. That's what we call starvation ketosis. That's still only halfway to the start of ketoacidosis. But the range that we look for are 0.5 to 2, 3. And if people are eating enough protein and getting enough vegetables, and again, the role of vegetables in the ketogenic diet is not just bulk to have something to eat. That's where we get a lot of our minerals, particularly potassium and magnesium. And when you look at cultures that lived as hunter-gatherers, again, it appears the role of vegetables was in part to get adequate minerals. So when you have, say, 5 servings of non-starchy vegetables per day, that's 15 to 20 grams of carbs. Even though they're low carb, 5 times 2 to 3 grams per serving is going to give you about 15 grams. If I eat some berries and some nuts in the day, again, 100 grams of each or less, we're again talking about another 15 grams. So that's going to be minimum 30 grams of carbohydrate. And that's going to significantly bring the ketones down into that 1 to 3 range, maybe as low as 0.5. Now, that was before we knew of the epigenetic effects of ketones. It appears that even in the lower range of 0.3 to 0.5, there are some benefits in terms of heart function. There may be some benefits in terms of that's where the early onset of this anti-inflammatory effect may occur. And again, so we're learning that this is more nuanced than just glucose fuel, ketone fuel, low or high. There's a spectrum of effects across that range, and we have a lot more to learn. We don't yet have the knowledge that would make me comfortable saying, oh, this is where you as a person should be. But we will know a lot more about that in the next few years. There are actually people who are developing real-time ketone sensors where, you've heard of, for diabetes, there's something called continuous glucose monitoring. Yeah. You actually wear a monitor and you monitor your glucose continuously. Wouldn't it be great if we had that for ketones too? And we could tell from monitoring that in thousands of people, what's the threshold of benefit? I mean, that would be so cool. And I'm only 72 years old, so I'm 71 going on 72. I figure in the next 10 years, I hope to remain intellectually capable enough to appreciate, these changes, because we're on a really interesting curve right now.
Oh, without a doubt. And it's interesting with levels of ketones. I hope I'm not keeping you too long, but this was quite interesting. I got sent a device to trial, and it's a device that sort of mimics like pursed lip breathing that respiratory patients use. So I used it on a treadmill So I would do a protocol where I would do interval training. So I would go out and do, say, 45 seconds hard as I can on a treadmill, and then 4 minutes of recovery. And what I found over a couple of weeks is that my intervals were less, they didn't impact so much on me. I started measuring my blood ketones before I did these intervals. And in the second week, my oxygen levels would desaturate down to around 90-91% after an interval. What I found is when my ketone levels were over 1.5, that oxygen saturation never went below 96%. And I just wonder whether the ketones are having effect on my oxygen saturations when I'm exercising.
Any response I would give would be pure speculation. But when you find something that works for you, that's a nugget of gold. The thing that I'm impressed with is humans are very diverse, however, and so when you want to look at the robustness or reproducibility of effect, you need to look at it in a bunch of different people. But if you can find something that improves oxygen saturation, and again, we know this is a signal, not just a fuel. That's a really intriguing observation that really deserves to be studied in a larger population.
Definitely, and hopefully one day we will get there. So if we're summarising some strategies for respiratory patients, a ketogenic diet would have many benefits as far as inflammation and as far as getting the CO2 out of their lungs better. But as you said earlier, this really needs to be utilised in conjunction with your doctor and a nutritionist.
Yes, it's a very potent tool, and the potency can benefit a person greatly, but it needs to be used wisely and hopefully guided by someone with experience, because there are potential pitfalls, particularly around medications. Probably less so for a respiratory patient. When you need rescue inhaler, when you need oxygen. But when you're dealing with type 2 diabetes or hypertension, those are more silent changes that can creep up on a person and cause a serious adverse event if not adequately monitored. And I hope that, again, our company is not the only people interested in this area. I think we're on the cutting edge of putting it into a virtual delivery telemedicine mode. And, we're saying this directly. We're not hiding it. We want to have copycats. We want to have people who do this. The world would be terrible if we only had one company making cars. It's a competition that is, in the marketplace that improves delivery and improves economy. And, I would hope in 3 to 5 years, this is a common tool that will be readily available in, not just in the developed world, but because of the internet, it can be available to anyone, anywhere in the world.
It certainly is a fast-moving topic, that's for sure. One thing I like to close with, as I've taken up far too much of your time, I think, and I ask this question to all my guests. If you were diagnosed with a severe respiratory disease, what are 3 strategies you would implement to improve your quality of life? And they can be anything you like.
Well, obviously I would, if I lived at high altitude, I'd move to low altitude. Increasing the partial pressure of oxygen is a good idea. I'm obviously biased that in my knowledge that burning fat produces less CO2 and reduces respiratory function demands. Again, as you point out, most respiratory diseases, whether it's cystic fibrosis or chemical-induced pulmonary disease, all involve inflammation, and anything that reduces inflammation would be beneficial. And there are a number of pro-inflammatory foods. I won't go to a list, but think of not just anti-inflammatory strategies, but how do we take out the inflammatory stimuli in our diet? And again, those are things I'd avoid, but that might be a topic for a different conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely go on for hours about this because I guess there's so many things coming out about the ketogenic diet and the different strategies and what diseases it's going to benefit and what it's not. I think there's a lot of, well, as I call it, rubbish about it being a miracle cure for everything. I don't think it's that, but I think it's a very useful strategy for many diseases, and it will be good if the research goes in that direction. I really appreciate your time today. I'm sure it's going to raise quite a few questions, but hopefully it's answered a lot of questions too. And I really appreciate your time.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for your questions, and thank you for taking the leadership in exploring this area. Waited for a long time for somebody to come and ask me these kinds of questions. I appreciate it.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and hopefully we can reconnect somewhere down the track and have a few more conversations about respiratory disease and how a ketogenic diet can help.
Thank you for listening to our podcast with Dr. Stephen Phinney. Remember, you can find COPD Athlete on Facebook under COPD Athlete, or you can visit the COPD Athlete website, copdathlete.com.
Be sure to tune in next time when we continue to explore chronic obstructive pulmonary disease.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Bye for now.